These first 9 plots is the first planting date. It was planted on September 29th. The year prior was the 17th. Reason behind that was we had some rain coming in late September there, so we had a window to get it in, so we just we pulled the trigger on it and got it in there because we don't know how long it'd keep us out. And then as we go down, you'll see the third and the second planting. The third planting there, that was planted on October 23rd. Year prior was the 28th. And then the next 9 you'll see was planted on October 10th. The year prior was the 11th. And within the planting date block, so within these 9 plots, there's 3 N rates: 75 pounds, 105 pounds, and 135 pounds of N. And those are blocked, so there's 3, 3, and 3. And then within those 3 N rates, there's 3 N timings in each one. And we just did spring applied nitrogen. We didn't have any fall applied N. So we put it on all at green up, a split app, half green up, half Feeks 5, or all at Feeks 5. With our green up application, we broadcasted urea over the top. With our Feeks 5 applications, we used 28%. And now as we walk down here, let's start moseying on this way. As we walk down, look up and down kind of road a little bit, and you'll see how this first planting looks a lot more dense than especially this third planting. And I'll get to why that is here shortly. So let's get down here kind of where the third planting starts. So that's where your third planting is going to start, where that right in here. The next 9 plots is our third planting. And like I said, it was planted on October 23rd this year. So you probably wonder, I don't know if you guys can see, take a look here. Does that look a little more dense or a little less dense compared to that first planting?
Yeah. What variety, Chris?
The variety out here, it's all Red Dragon. And it's a soft red wheat. And we planted it at 1.8 million seeds to the acre. And as you'll notice, this is a little taller. It's kind of a taller variety compared to others. This average is about 37 inches in height. And so back to the density of this. So you notice this is a little less dense. Where's that coming from? Tillering. This one didn't tiller as much as that first planting did. So we did tiller counts out here. We do them in the fall, and we did them in the spring. Last fall, the first planting, 1 to 2 tillers. Third planting, 0 tillers, just a spike. The second planting, which we'll get to, 0 tillers, just the main stem. We also did these the year prior. The year prior, they were a little different. First planting was 4 tillers in the fall, 5 in the spring. Third planting was 0 tillers in the fall and spring. That one was a lot farther behind there. And then the second planting was 0 tiller, or 1 to 2 in the fall and 0 tillers in the spring. And we're thinking we may have had a little winter kill. We're thinking that main stem may have cannibalized itself to survive through the winter. Because as you all know, last winter was pretty harsh for wheat. A lot of winter kill throughout the state. This winter we had a little better conditions. So the next thing I want to get into is a little bit about weather, because obviously you guys all know weather is very variable. We can't predict it. If we could, it'd make things a lot easier. Because this year, this wheat is about 5 to 10 days ahead of where we were last year. And I was trying to figure out, where did that come from? So I started looking at air temperature, soil temperature, rainfall, growing degree days. Those 4 factors, I started really digging into that. And so first I started out looking at the fall temps, seeing maybe that's where it came from. So I looked at the fall temps from fall of 2014 and 13, and it dropped below 60 degrees about the middle of October. And why do I say 60? Because the optimal temperature for tillering is 60 to 75 degrees air temperature. And then soil temps, you want about 50 to 60 degrees. So once it drops below those points, your wheat's going to slow down and gear up for winter, start storing its sugars, and it's not going to grow anymore. Hence, it's not going to put on those extra tillers like that first planting did. And so I was like, all right, so it didn't seem to come in the fall, so I started looking into the spring. And where I noticed, this March was slightly warmer than last March. Last March was a lot cooler. The wheat didn't start moving until end of March. We had, I think it was 75 growing degree days more this March in comparison to last March. And so that's pretty big when it comes to wheat, because once that starts taking off, as many of you probably know, wheat will really shoot up. Because I came out here this year, I think it was May 14th, did some heights, came out 12 days later. That wheat grew 12 inches in 12 days, believe it or not. Because if it gets those right temperatures, it'll just take off in the spring. I mean, you'll come out here and you'll come out 2 weeks later and you'll say, holy cow, you know? It's amazing how fast it'll grow. And so, back to that, and then I looked at April, and April was about the same, growing degree day-wise. Temperatures are pretty similar both years. So the big boost we got was in March this year, because it was about an 11% increase in growing degree days in March and April this year compared to last year. So that's probably why, if you guys wonder, why your wheat's a little farther ahead this year, well, that's where I'm thinking it came from, was those warmer temps in March. Let's move down a little bit here so we can get to the second planting. And like I said, the second planting this year was planted on October 10th. The year prior was the 11th. And so as we get here, look at this one. See kind of how this looks compared to that third, compared to that first. Does it look more dense, less dense, and so forth? Now it should look kind of in between the first and third, because like I said, this one, when we did the spring tillers, this one had about 1 to 2, the first had 2 to 3, and the third had 0. And I should say we did those counts on April 6th. That's when we put our green up applications on out here, was April 6th this year. The year prior, we put them on April 11th. And so that's because, due to that warmer weather in March, the plant got moving and it greened up quicker this year, about 5 days earlier. And also, like our Feeks 5 apps, and when we hit flag leaf and when we hit flowering, those were all a little ahead this year.
What do you use to determine green up?
As far as determining green up, it's basically you come out and you check, as it's greening up, and it's kind of a staging thing. Wheat staging can get tricky. It's more the Feeks like 2 to 3 stages. And what is that? It's basically, as you see those tillers kind of starting to move a little bit, that's kind of where what you want to look at to see if it's hitting green up. Because if the plant looks pretty, mellow, it's not really perking up yet, that's kind of what you want to look for. So the next thing I'd like to get into is a little bit about results from last year, because this year, obviously, I don't have any yield to tell you yet. And hopefully this stays looking this beautiful all the way till July here, because last year we had a little lodging, and this year we don't have it yet. I'm hoping we don't, because it's not fun to deal with come harvest, and Andy knows all about that. So, so last year what we saw just a planting date reaction, and the biggest thing we saw was the planting date by end rate interaction. We didn't see an end rate significance or an end timing significance, and that's due to rainfall. I guess before I get into results, I kind of want to talk a little bit about rainfall that we saw this year compared to last. Last year in March and April, we had 1.79 inches of rain here. And I thought that was pretty low. It's well below the average. This year, we only had 1.37 inches of rain in March and April. Even drier, and I was kind of surprised at that. But like Michigan weather, you can't predict it. You never know what's going to happen. And then in May, last year, 2.5 inches. May this year, 4 inches. Why is that important? This is part of this study, has to do with end timing. So with your end timing, if we're just getting little spurts of rain, quarter inch, that end isn't going to move in the soil very quickly. It's not going to be prone to leaching, because if you're not getting an inch and a 2-inch rain to really move that nitrate through the soil, that end could stick around throughout most of your growing season, especially with your spring applied nitrogen. So back to those results I was going to get to there. Like I said, we had a planting date and a planting date by end rate. So with planting date last year, the first planting date was 89 bushel. Second planting date, 111 bushel. And the third planting date, 80 bushel. You probably wonder, okay, where'd that 20 bushel decrease come from in that first planting date? Well, I came out here about the same time that this wheat day is. I think it was about June 17th or 18th. Came out to check out my wheat, see how it's looking. Walked down to the first planting date, it's all flat on the ground. And I was like, oh geez, that's not good, because you know, my first year I was new to it. Go to Kurt, I'm like, Kurt, the wheat's flat on the ground. He goes, well, it's all right, you know, don't be alarmed by that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, it's part of research. If we didn't see differences with research, why would we do it? So that's all part of, you know, part of this whole study here. And so that was pretty interesting there. And so the next, probably the biggest thing we saw last year was a planting date by N rate interaction. So with our first planting date last year, the most economic optimum N rate, 75 pounds. Not 105, not 135, it was 75 pounds of N. Believe it or not. And with that, we averaged 96 bushel. And then with the two lower N rates, we had about 86 bushel. So we had a 10 bushel increase with that lower N rate. And like I said, that was lodged. So those two higher N rates were a little more lodged because it was just juicier. That stem was a lot juicier and it couldn't hold itself up as well as that lower N rate did. And also we had low amounts of rainfall, so that N may, you know, have stuck around and it didn't need that extra N. Then with our second planting date, again, 75 pounds of N. All three of them were about 110 bushel across the board, all three N rates. So again there, 75 pounds of N maximized our yields. Then with our third planting date, there it needed a little more N. Because in the fall and spring it was a lot shorter. You know, it was just like a spike coming out in the spring. The main stem wasn't even up yet. Just a little spike in the spring last year on our third planting. So there it needed, the most economic, the best N rate there was 105 pounds. So with there we averaged about 84 bushel with the 105 pound N rate. And then with our 75 pound N rate, it was 75 bushel. And the 135 pound N rate was 80 bushel. So there, with the 105 pounds compared to 75, we had a 10 bushel increase. So that comes into play, you know, if you have that. So with later plantings, it may need a little more N to really stimulate some tillering early in the spring to get that plant going. Because with tillering, you get more grain heads. More grain heads usually will result in more yields. I won't say always will, because you never know what will happen. But most times, with that tillering, I mean, even here you can see how dense and how nice that first planting looks right now. I mean, they all look pretty good, but just, you know, lush, you know, the lush of it looks, it's just filled out a lot more. And so, another question, you know, what is high management wheat? Is it just nitrogen rate? Is that what's all high N? Is that high management wheat? Or maybe fungicide applications? The one big factor we got to think about is planting date. Planting date should always be thrown in there when you're talking about high management wheat. Because as you can see here, you know, as you can see some of our results last year, you know, those earlier planting dates yielded a lot better because they can get those tillers out and get that growth going a lot sooner. Now I understand you may not be able to get it out on a timely manner. And that's part of farming, you know, there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of things that can happen. Maybe too wet, your crop may not mature quick enough, and then, you know, there's options with that. You could maybe try a lower maturing soybean, get those matured a little quicker, and get in and get that wheat planted end of September, early October, versus end of October, you know, early November, just to get it in quick. And that, you know, that could work in some years, but if we have a year like last year with that winter kill, it may hurt you if you get it in pretty late like that, because it doesn't have that growth to survive through the winter. And another thing is you may be a little hesitant. You know how I talked about lodging on that first planting. You may get a little hesitant. Well, why would I plant it that early if it's just going to fall on the ground? Well, there's options with that too. You know, you could maybe try a PGR, a plant growth regulator such as Palisade, shorten that plant maybe 3-4 inches, and that could get you through. And Mike will touch on that, so I'm not going to go into that much, so I'll leave that to Mike. But another option is, you know, like I said, this is a kind of a taller maturing cultivar. So maybe try a shorter maturing cultivar. That could be another option you could do if you want to get it, you know, that with that early planting date, if you're hesitant, you know what I've been saying about the lodging, if that really scares you, just, you know, there's some things you can try. And another thing I did out here, we do some grain head counts per square foot. Last year, there was some pretty big differences. In the first planting, we had about 85 heads per square foot, and then the second was 72, and the third was 68. So you can imagine what that first planting date could have been if it wouldn't have lodged. Because once that wheat lodges, and it lodged about a month before harvest, so once that wheat goes down, it puts a kink in it. When you got a kink in something, kind of shuts the flow down a little bit, because the roots bring in the nutrients. So once that nutrients has a hard time getting through, it's going to affect your grain fill, affect your test weights as well. And we saw that out here. The test weights last year on the first planting was 53. The second and third were around 58. And 60 is kind of your standard you want to shoot for. So that first was a lot lower, and it had a lot to do with that lodging because it couldn't properly grain fill into harvest. So we did head counts out here this year, and I only did it by planting date right now. I didn't have time to analyze it all yet. So by the first planting date, they were about 67 heads per square feet. Second, which is right here, was 64, and then the third was 62. So they're all pretty similar, but don't let that fool you. These grain heads could be a lot bigger than those third planting. So it all depends how grain fill fills out here in the next 2 months here. That's really going to determine what happens with these yields out here. So with that, if you guys got some questions.
A couple minutes. Chris did a lot of talking. Let's see if you can give us a few questions.
Was there a reason why you didn't put any fall fertilizer on, or is it a waste of time and waste of money? Or I mean, we've always put a little bit of N and our P and K on in the fall if we could.
Yeah, the reason we did that is strictly because this is an end timing study, so we just want to look at spring applied nitrogen. So we didn't want to throw that fall applied N factor in there, because it just, you'd have to spread this study out way too, it just have to be way too big, because, and
also there's 8 studies in this field. There's 2 studies specifically looking at that.
Yeah.
Oh, there is.
The one
by starter, fall starter.
The one you go to next, Kurt's going to touch on. The study you're looking at next talks about fall applied N and spring applied N. So he'll hit on that once you guys get over there
the
today.
Other thing in Michigan with the volatility, we really are hesitant on putting fall applied nitrogen, just because of the rain and we're getting to be a lot more products, and that's what Kurt will get into that a lot more, where they're safening it. However, at this point, we don't recommend a lot of N. And generally, there's times where Chris was saying with the timings, maybe a little bit of N might help catch that weed up and promote tillering if you got a later planting.
We never put much on. But
I know. I'm just saying.
Well, with the later planting, I don't know how much it'll help you, because once that plant shuts down for the winter.
The later planting, I don't know what it's going to look like in the spring.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
So.
You don't want to take the risk.
That, we should have a lot more answers in a year or two.
Yeah.
Whether it's starter in. We had some results last year, and I can't remember them right offhand, but you'll be walking by the study as you go by, and that's a starter end study right down there.
Oh, the starter end's over here, actually. That one's Palisade and planting date.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that one's working with adding Palisade as another factor of using it. So.
Can you speak to seeding rates a little bit?
The seeding rate on this, it's all planted at 1.8 million seeds to the acre, because we went with one seeding rate just because, like I said, you can't, because we're not looking at seeding rate, we're looking at by planting date. So we want to see what, at the early planting, the late, what that'll do, So that's why we don't fluctuate our seeding rates out here.
But good question. I think we might be addressing that this next year, because I know he already has 27 treatments. We had to stop it.
I'd take up this whole field.
3 by 3,
I got 108 plots, so we couldn't make it bigger.
Trying to get these timings in. So, like I said, let alone add seeding rates to the factor. So.
Yep.
Are you seeing anything between urea and UAN?
As far as a difference in, no, we haven't seen a difference yet. And I don't know if we will, as far as, when we applied it, because that'd show up in our end timing when it put down. But as far as the urea versus 28, we haven't seen a difference in yield or anything with that. So.
Did you put your 28 on with streamers?
Yeah, we put them on with streamer bars. Yep.
On your early planted wheat, where you said look so nice, lush and dense and growth. Did you see more disease on that?
No, we did not. I should say we did put a fungicide application on at flagleaf, and we also put one on at flowering. So we did not see any disease out here in that.
And in fact, that's another caveat we, maybe with Marty Chilvers and stuff we were looking at is possibly by having the early planting, we're missing that infestation period, and we actually had less disease incidences on your earlier plantings.
Yeah.
Because they were already through the flowering process. So,
I guess I should say last year, our first planting, we didn't have anything, but the third we had very minimal head blight. So we did see a little something with that later planting because it doesn't flower as soon, so it may get these pretty humid conditions that are make it.
Septoria and stuff with a denser canopy.
Oh yeah, no.
Powdery mildew.
Yeah, we didn't have any foliar diseases out here this year. I haven't seen powdery in this last year or this year, so.
I guess that's a good issue.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
So
They gotta go. We got one more.
sorry.
Just was curious if you'd done anything like with layer manure applications ahead of planting in the fall.
Is there studies out here?
We have one treatment out here where we're using chicken manure, and very little. One of the problems is we do them specifically, and we're doing a lot more in corn. And we just started playing around a little bit in wheat, and we think there's some potential there, but with the releasing and stuff, we were looking at a little more long term. And to be honest, we had so many. You could say we're picking the lower fruit right now because we're just trying to catch up and do a lot of these. We take a survey of the wheat growers, and these are some of the issues that that came up that when Kurt was doing surveys at meetings that they want to address. So this is where we were going first. But we are looking a little bit at some of them, especially with the chicken manure.
Yeah.
So I know we're doing it with beets, and then we have some with corn, and we have some with potato.